Sanibonani, Dumelang, hello everybody. Mama H here, and that of course means it's time for life sciences. So what are we looking at today? Well, we're focusing on human populations and interactions, and remember that this is a revision lesson. So we're going to be looking at keywords, content, skills, and we're going to be trying to assist you in terms of being prepared and not in a panic when it comes to tests and exams, which means that we're going to equip you with skills to answer the questions as well as some practice at actually using those skills. Now, in our last lesson, I went into a lot of detail on how to answer a multiple choice question, how to answer a paragraph question, etc. So we'll speed up that part of the lesson today, and we will simply try and focus on some more examples of the kinds of test questions that you must expect. So if we look at our mind map, looking at all the different aspects of population ecology, this particular lesson is going to focus on the various different interactions in the environment as well as human populations. And I told you last time that we must expect different kinds of questions to pop up in tests: multiple choice, terminology, paragraphs, and data response. So let's focus our attention now on multiple choice items. Now, do you remember the strategy that I taught you in our last lesson? Do you remember that for multiple choice, we used the strategy rescue? Let's remind ourselves very briefly of that strategy. Rescue involves read, eliminate, and select. We read the question, we eliminate the options that are immediately incorrect to us, then we go and select the option that we think best answers the question. We then check, so R-E-S, we check the answer, and you never leave a multiple choice question out because you have 25% chance of actually being correct. So let's apply the rescue strategy as we look at this particular question. So first of all, let's read it carefully. Which conditions would lead to an increase in the population? We've got food supply, predation, and disease. Now let's move into the eliminate. We want to look at an increase in population size. If food supply increases, yes, that would cause an increase in the population size. If predation increases, well, to me, that's going to cause a decrease. If disease decreased, our population would grow. So I'm going to eliminate this because apart from the fact that predation certainly doesn't increase the population size, it doesn't make sense. I'm going to eliminate A. What if the food supply increases? Yes, that is going to increase our population size. Predation decreases. That is going to increase population size. And disease increasing, decreasing, that is going to increase population size. So I'm not going to eliminate B at this point. A decrease in food supply, that's going to decrease my population size. An increase in predation is also going to decrease population size. An increase in disease, that one is definitely needing to be eliminated. decreased food supply. Decreased predation will increase the population size, increased disease will decrease, and so I've eliminated. Now I'm going to select that B is my answer. I'm going to check it. An increased food supply, a decreased predation, and a decrease in disease is definitely going to increase my population size. Do you see that it wasn't a case of just looking at the question and guessing one of the answers? We worked through a logical process to make sure we got to the right answer. Let's use our rescue strategy to read the question. At which point is the population growing most rapidly? Well, if we look, we've got A, it's growing quite slowly. B, it's growing very rapidly. C, it's going to start slowing down or decelerating. And D, it's going to fluctuate. So our answer here is B. It's growing most rapidly at point B. Which letter illustrates the influence of environmental resistance? Where are we seeing environmental resistance keeping our population stable? And in this case, we're looking at point A. Now, do you remember that we are also in section A of an exam paper going to encounter terminology questions, and they can come in two different formats. We can get terminology questions associated with columns, and we can get terminology questions where we're given a definition and we have to provide the term. So when you are looking at this kind of question, you apply the rescue strategy and you follow the instructions as I taught you in the last lesson. You make sure that you write the correct option down as you have been told in the instructions. So let's try these. A symbiotic relationship that benefits one organism and harms the other. Is it mutualism? Is it commensalism? Is it both mutualism and commensalism? Or is it neither or none? Well, if we've got the idea of benefiting one and harming the other, you remember the thumbs up, thumbs down? We're looking at something called parasitism. And so here, our answer is going to be none. What about a flea living on a dog? What do we call the flea? Is it the host? Is it the parasite? Is it both? Or is it none? Well, the flea is going to be doing the damage and getting the benefit. So therefore, it is the parasite, whilst the poor dog is being harmed, so it is the host. So if we go back to our question, we're going to here say B only. An impala that is hunted and killed by a lion, what do we call the impala? Is it the prey? Is it a heterotroph? Is it both? Or is it none? Well, here it's not just predator or prey. We now have a little bit of a complication. The impala is most definitely the prey and not the predator. The lion is the predator. So we know then that option A is correct. Now, option B talks about it being a heterotroph. Remember that all organisms are either autotrophs or heterotrophs. If they make their own food, they're autotrophs. If they eat other food, they're a heterotroph. Where does that put the impala? Well, the impala eats grass. and leaves and vegetation. So it is definitely a heterotroph. So in this case, we've got the answer both A and B. That's our answer there. I think we need to possibly take a break. So when we come back, we can look at some more different kinds of terminology questions, definition and term. Why don't you get a piece of paper and a pen and see if you can answer the questions before I give you the answer. So during this break, run and get some pen and paper, and I'll see you in a bit. Welcome back. I hope you've got your pen and your paper and you are ready to tackle the answers before I give them to you. So this is what we're doing, human populations and interactions, and now we're focusing on, given the definition, can you supply the term? Remember that you have to read the statement, offer only one term, and check your spelling to make it as accurate as possible, so we're following the ROC strategy. When organisms fight over limited resources in the environment, what do we call this? Can you write it quicker than what I can? I hope you do. We're talking about competition. I heard you say, yes, I got that right. Well done. When organisms are hunted to provide food, what is that answer? Predation. Good. We're on a roll. When organisms occupy the same niche, but they manage to avoid competition, what do we call that? Well, we can call it niche partitioning. In other words, we are going to separate or partition the niche. Another term for it could be specialization. Now, what do you do in a test or an exam when two terms are equally correct? Please don't give two terms. Select the one that you think is correct. On your teacher's memorandum for this test, your teacher will have both terms and will be able to mark the one that you have selected. Please only give one term per question. Let's move on. A graph that illustrates gender and age groups in a population. Once again, we could call this an age-gender distribution or an age-gender graph, or we could call it an age-gender pyramid. All of those terms are correct. You just supply one term. The shape of the human population growth curve, we are looking at an exponential growth curve. The kind of competition where baby birds in a nest, so we're looking at the same species, compete for food from the parents. So the same species, that is intra-specific competition. So two words making up our one term. Make sure that you spell this intra-specific correctly. The number of individuals of a population that a particular area can support, that is known as the carrying capacity. And you need to put both words down because carrying capacity is the full term. When different populations live in an area, what do we call that? Well, different populations in an area build up a community. How did you do with those questions? Were you able to write them down quickly or answer them in your head? I hope so. Terminology is so important. You can score such a lot of marks as long as you know your terminology. But let's move on. We're going to now focus on paragraph writing. In our last lesson, I gave you all the tips on how to tackle paragraph type questions. Make sure that you read the question. Make sure that there is a topic sentence. Don't repeat the question at the start of the paragraph. Make sure that your sentences are logically structured. Keep your sentences short. Once you've written the paragraph, read through it, edit it in order to check grammar and spelling, and finally check that what you have written actually answers the question and that you haven't gone off at a tangent talking about something else that doesn't in fact answer what you were asked. Are you ready to try an example? Let's go. Write a paragraph in which you, and here we go, number 1, identify the kind of graph illustrated by A and B, and then you describe the relationship between the two curves. So our question, in fact, asks you to do two things. And so in our paragraph, we must make sure that we don't only address the first part of the question, that we also answer the second part of the question. Let's look at the question and the graph again and see if we can identify what is the focus, because that's going to be our first topic sentence of our paragraph. So we're dealing here with the kind of graph and a relationship between two curves. We've got population size and we've got time. And we can see that our two graphs are following more or less the same pattern, but one graph is slightly delayed and the population size is lower than the other graph. What do we have here? What we're looking at is a predator-prey interaction or a predator-prey relationship graph. And that must be part of our topic sentence. We need to kind of highlight to the examiner or your teacher who's marking your test that you know precisely what it is you're going to be talking about. So I'm going to show you my paragraph and let's see if we've answered both parts of the question in my paragraph. So, identifying the kind of graph and describing the relationship. Here is my topic sentence. The graph illustrates a predator-prey relationship. A nice, short, simple question. A simple sentence. Short, small, and what it does is it gives us the focus of the rest of the paragraph. We understand that the rest of the paragraph is going to be about predator-prey relationships. A, because we were asked to identify A and B, A is the prey graph, right? So we can see A, the pink graph up there, that shows us the population of the prey, and B is the predator graph. So the blue one is the predator graph. Now we also have to describe the relationship between the two curves. So let's get on to that one. An increase in the size of the prey population, so an increase in the pink graph, provides plenty of food for the predator population, which therefore also is going to show an increase in size. as the predator population increases, so as blue increases, we're going to see that obviously more prey is going to be eaten. And we're going to see the prey population, the pink graph, now decreasing. The smaller prey population means, oh no, less food for the predators, and some will also die then of starvation, or they might actually emigrate and say there's not enough food, so we're going to leave the population. And what we're going to see here is that the blue graph is also going to decrease. But with fewer predators, the prey population then can increase in size. And so we see the pink graph increasing again in size. And the whole cycle is going to start all over again. This continues in regular cycles, maintaining a balance between the two populations of the different species. All right, so we've addressed everything that was in that question. We've got short sentences. Our sentences are logically constructed according to how the question was structured. I think that's a great paragraph. Let's look at another one. Write a paragraph in which you describe the trends. And remember, when we talk about trends, we're talking about patterns in the relationship. So what is our graph? Our graph shows human population growth, and that is indicated with the purple graph, and extinction rate of other organisms. That is our green graph, and we see that as the purple graph increases, so does the green graph. So now we have to write a paragraph in which we describe these trends. What are we going to use as our topic sentence? I think our topic sentence really needs to indicate what the consequences are for an increase in the human population. So what was my paragraph? The graph illustrates a comparison between the human population growth rate and the extinction rate of natural populations over the same period of time. So here, my topic paragraph is a little bit longer than what, my topic sentence is a little bit longer than what we have used in other paragraphs. But what that topic sentence does is it explains the whole purpose of the graph. It almost gives us a title for the graph as well. Now let's go on and look at the rest of the question. We have to describe the trends. The graph indicates that as the human population had been growing exponentially, we see that the extinction rate is also increasing exponentially. So this indicates that there could be a causal relationship between the increase in human numbers and the increase in extinctions. So we've described the trend. The trend means what is the pattern? As one increases, so is the other one increasing. And the consequences of that are that we can see that it's possible that the increase in human population rate is causing an increase in the extinction rate. We've suggested that the relationship is one of cause and effect. The cause is the increased human population, and the effect is going to be the increase in extinction rate. welcome back, and we are together, Mama H and you, and that means it's life sciences. And of course we are looking at population ecology, and we're looking at how to do data response questions in this particular section. So let's look at what we mean by the data response question. Remember, reading the question is essential, and then reading or studying the resources. Reread the question. Be very certain of what you are being asked to do. And then you start answering each part of the question. Mark allocation will give you an idea of how much information is required. If you're asked to interpret, you have to analyze and explain data, and very important, drawing tables and the different kinds of graphs. These are hugely important skills that you need to know to answer data response questions. So let's give one a try, shall we? This first one is one that gives us lots of text in the beginning, a lot to read through. Use your pen or your highlighter to underline the important things. A learner performed the following investigation. She wanted to find out if plant seedlings that are crowded would grow as tall as seedlings planted with adequate space between them. So what did she do? She placed the same amounts of identical soil in two identical pots, and she labeled them pot A and pot B. Into pot A, she planted 40 radish seeds, and she made sure they were equally spaced apart. Into pot B, she only planted 5. Right, so there's a difference. She also spaced them equally apart. She placed the pots on a warm windowsill. She watered them both every day with the identical amount of water. And after 2 days, the seeds in both pots began to germinate. What did she do? She measured the average height of the seeds every day, and she recorded her measurements. Here is the table. Day 1, after germination, we see that pot A has an average seedling height of 2 millimeters. In that pot, in day 2, they had grown to 10 millimeters, 12, all the way up to 22 millimeters on day 8. In the meantime, what was happening in pot B? Well, also starting at 2 millimeters for the first day, 11, 15, 22, just have a look at that interesting point, all the way up to 78 millimeters. So just looking at the data table, we can see that there is a difference in the way these plants in the two different pots are growing. Remember, they're the same kind of plant. They're getting the same amount of resources. The only difference is we've got crowding in one pot, in other words, a high population density, and we've got a low population density or adequate spacing in the other pot. So we can see that certainly we've got a difference in terms of the growth. But to get a better picture of what the trend is in terms of this difference, let's look at our first question. Draw a graph to illustrate this data. Now, I want to ask you, please, if you are writing your test and you've got about 5 lines at the bottom of the page, don't try and squash your graph into that small amount of space. Make the graph large over a full page, if possible, so that you've got space to draw, so that it's easy for your marker to read and mark, and it's easy for you to plot the points. So we start off drawing our graph with two axes, the y-axis and the x-axis. We're going to have to allocate our variables to the two axes. Remember that we are controlling time. So your days are going to be on the x-axis. The thing that we are measuring is the height of the seedlings. And you're going to look and see your smallest height was 2, your greatest height is 78. So let's start with 2 and let's go up to 80 and let's decide, are we going to do these 2, 4, 6, or are we going to say that our smallest value is going to be 5, 10, 15? What you're doing is you're determining a scale for your axis. It was very easy to determine the scale for the x-axis. It was 1, 2, 3, right, the days. But now we have to make a scale for the y-axis that goes up in equal increments or in equal gaps. Remember also that we're looking at two sets of data. So on our one graph, we're going to have two different sets of axes, two different lines growing. So I think it would be best to use two different colors. And as you can see, mine here is rather messy. So let me show you the graph that I did when I had a proper ruler and a proper pencil and different colors, and I could measure everything out perfectly, just like you have in the test. So here is my final graph. I have a heading, and my heading shows me both of the variables, the height of the seedlings and the various days. I'm showing on my y-axis height of seedling, average height, and millimeters, and my days are just simply numbered along the x-axis. I'm also going to give an indication of a key. I'm going to show that pot A is going to be the green graph and pot B is going to be my blue graph. And of course, I plotted the points by going to the data table. So let's see how I would have plotted, for example, day 5's data. For pot A, at day 5, I go up at 5, and I have to see that my seedling height is 20. I would measure along and I would plot my point. What would be happening in terms of pot B on day 5? I would plot my point at just over 40 because my B seedling average was 42 millimeters. I would join my lines nice and smoothly and I would have drawn my graph. Heading, axes labeled, a good scale on the axis, points plotted accurately, and of course then the line drawn nice and smoothly, and there is my graph. Now I need to look further and see what questions am I going to be asked that are going to assist me in interpreting and analyzing this data. So drawing the graph is just the beginning. Let's take a little bit of a break. Let's look at this graph carefully when we come back after the break and make sure that we can analyze the data perfectly. Welcome back. We're looking at population ecology and we're looking at data response questions. So before the break, we went and drew this beautiful graph. Now we have to answer the questions. Which is the dependent variable? And we need to give reasons for our answer. Remember that the dependent variable is going to be the one that you measure. And that is the reason that we call it the dependent one. The height of the seedlings depends on how much time has passed. Question 3. State a hypothesis for this investigation. This is very important, learners. You need to make sure that you understand the scientific method and the various steps of the scientific method. So let's do a quick catch-up. Your scientific method starts with an observation where you lead on to a question, then you state a hypothesis, you do the experiment, you get your results, you can come to a conclusion, and you can then relate back to your hypothesis to see whether your hypothesis was correct or not. Notice when we talk about stating a hypothesis, it is not asking a question. It's going to be a sentence. So we got back to our question and it said the learner performed the investigation, and what did she want to do? She wanted to find out if plant seedlings that are crowded will grow as tall as seedlings planted with adequate space between them. Now your hypothesis is an answer to what you were trying to find out. It is a suggested prediction of what you think is going to be the result. And so you state it as a sentence. And you'll see that in terms of our investigation, there are different hypotheses that you could have stated. So you could have said, seedlings that are crowded will grow as tall as seedlings that are not crowded. Or you could have said, seedlings that are crowded will actually grow taller than seedlings that are not crowded. Or you could have said, seedlings that are crowded will not grow as tall as seedlings that are not crowded. Any one of those statements is a correct hypothesis. Remember that your hypothesis is a prediction. You haven't done the investigation yet. You don't know if your prediction is going to be carried out or overturned, so it doesn't matter. At this point in time, you use the most obvious one that you think is going to be the answer, and you write or state your hypothesis. I'm going to choose this one as my stated hypothesis. Which pot showed the most favorable plant growth pattern? And I think we can see very clearly pot B is showing the best growth pattern, because by the end of our investigation, these plants are on average approaching 80 millimeters, whereas in pot A, they are really staying the same at around 22 millimeters. Suggest a reason. Well, our reason needs to refer back to the only variable that our investigator changed, and that was number of seeds that she planted per pot. And a possible reason here could relate to overcrowding and competition. We could say that in pot A, conditions were crowded. In other words, high population density means greater competition. In pot B, there was more space. lower population density, less competition. Use the trends, and remember trends refer to the patterns shown in this graph, as evidence for the statement competition is a density-dependent limiting factor. So the trend shows that when there is less competition, because there's a lower density in the population, we find that our organisms can share the various different resources. When there is crowding and therefore greater competition, the limiting factors, in other words, water, light, minerals in the soil, are now going to have to be shared. The same amount of resources are going to have to be shared with a greater or a more dense population. Let's move on. Question 7. Go back to the hypothesis you stated. Do the results of this investigation support your hypothesis? So we said that there were 3 possible hypotheses, and I quite like this last one, that crowding means that they are not going to grow as tall as the seeds that were planted with adequate spacing. So that was what my original hypothesis would be. Do the results indicate or confirm my hypothesis, indicate that my hypothesis was correct and therefore confirm it? Yes, they do. So seedlings that are crowded, here's my pot A, seedlings that are crowded did not grow as tall as seedlings that are grown with less crowding. And so my answer would be yes, my hypothesis is confirmed as a result of the evidence obtained. Now, if your hypothesis was overturned, and does this then have implications to say that your investigation was wrong or faulty? And have you still actually done science? So if you said originally, let's say this was your hypothesis, that the seeds would grow as tall in both pots, irrespective of the crowding. If that was your hypothesis, you'll see that that hypothesis has been overturned. Does it matter? Does it mean that your investigation was wrong or you've done bad science? Absolutely not. Your investigation was a good investigation. What you've simply done is show us what is not the answer rather than what is the situation. So you said, I think the seedlings will grow as tall. And your investigation showed you, no, this isn't what happens. It doesn't matter. You've still done the science, and all you have to then say is, my hypothesis was overturned. That's all. It doesn't mean you were wrong. It just means you stated what is an incorrect prediction, but it doesn't mean you're going to lose marks. It simply means that your prediction wasn't the correct prediction. That's all. You've still done science. And your science was good because you controlled the investigation perfectly. Now, discuss the validity of this investigation and how could the learner have made the investigation more reliable. And so we need to look at these terms, validity and reliability. Often, questions relating to the scientific method are going to ask you about validity and reliability. So they all relate to how good your investigation was. but they relate to two different things. Validity, and I want to give you a tip here, validity talks about the variables. So will you remember, please, V for validity, V for variables. And this is, did the learner control the investigation by controlling the variables? If the learner controlled the variables and kept certain variables constant and only changed one variable, then we can say that this investigation is valid. Let's turn our attention now to reliability. What does that mean? Well, I want you to look at the reliability starting with RE, and I'm going to give you the word here, repeat. So when we talk about reliability, we are asking the question, if we repeated this investigation, would we get the same results? Every time we did the investigation, would we get the same outcome? In other words, we're asking, was that original set of results just by chance? If we did the investigation again, would we find different results? So what we need to think about when we talk about reliability is, how well can we rely on these results to be indicating the truth to us about this particular experimental setup? So answering the questions, discuss the validity, and asking how we could make it more reliable. When we're talking about validity, we look at our question. It said that she placed the same amounts, identical soil, 2 identical pots. She planted the seeds equally spaced apart. She put all the pots, or both pots, on the warm windowsill. She watered them both identical amounts of water. And she measured the heights every day. She kept everything the same. She didn't put one pot in a dark cupboard or forget to water it, right? All the variables were controlled. The only variable she changed was the number of seeds in the pot. So I would say that this was a really valid experiment. What would I say in terms of her reliability? I would say maybe she should repeat the investigation. Maybe instead of using just 2 pots, she should repeat the same investigation with 20 pots. And then maybe she should look at, does the same thing happen with other species of vegetables or seeds? So what she's doing is trying to make her investigation more reliable by looking at repeating, increasing the sample size, and extending it to look at other species of plants. Have we managed to come to some kind of understanding about population ecology? Do you feel equipped to go into a test or any assessment task with skills that are going to help you interpret questions, understand how to answer them? I'm sure you will. I've got the biggest amount of faith in you. You go and revise this work carefully, and who knows, you could shift those marks for life sciences up a symbol or 2, and that would just be first class. From me, Mama H, and all about population ecology, bye-bye.